December 5, 1941. The frozen steppes outside Moscow, under a sky heavy with swirling snow. The wind howls like a wounded beast, whipping flakes into a blinding curtain that stings the face of Captain Ivan Petrov as he grips the turret hatch of his T-34, the diesel engine rumbling beneath him like a distant thunder. Petrov, a wiry Ukrainian from the Donbass coal fields, squints through the frost-rimed periscope, his breath fogging the glass. He's 32 with calloused hands from years wrenching bolts in Kharkov's tank factories, and now, after a frantic rush of production lines belching out these crude beasts, he's leading a platoon from the 1st Guards Tank Brigade into the teeth of the German advance. The T-34's sloped armor plates, welded in haste, some say with laughter in the Soviet design bureaus, gleam dully under the pale light, their 76mm guns pointed forward like accusatory fingers. Below the snow, the earth is a graveyard of shattered illusions. Just months earlier, in the sweltering heat of summer 1941, the Wehrmacht had rolled across the border in their Blitzkrieg symphony. Panzer IIIs and IVs slicing through Polish and French lines with mechanical precision, their riveted hulls painted in the stark gray of conquest. Hitler had boasted of his paper panzers, light, fast, armed with 50mm cannons that punched through anything in their path. But whispers from the front had reached Berlin. The Soviets were building something different. Factory 183 in Kharkov, under the relentless drive of Mikhail Koshkin, had birthed the T-34 in 1940, a tank born of necessity, not finesse. Its wide tracks chewed through mud where panzers bogged down. Its sloped 45mm armor deflected shells at angles that baffled German engineers. A tractor with a gun, one captured Wehrmacht report sneered, dismissing the rough welds and simple Christie suspension as Bolshevik barbarism. Petrov remembers the evacuation, trains loaded with half-finished hulls fleeing east as Luftwaffe Stukas screamed overhead, bombing the Dnieper bridges. He was there in September when the first T-34s rumbled off the line, their V2 engines coughing to life amid the acrid smoke of welders' torches. Now, as his tank lurches forward through the birch groves on the Moscow-Volga Canal, the radio crackles with orders from General Zhukov. Hold the line. Make them pay for every meter. The brigade's 32 T-34s, reinforced from the Siberian reserves, fan out in the dim twilight, their crews bundled in sheepskin coats against the -30-degree cold that bites deeper than any bullet. Across the snow-choked fields, the German 2nd Panzer Group under Guderian grinds onward, their Mark IIIs churning ruts into the ice, exhaust plumes marking their trail like dragon breath. Lieutenant Hans Weber, a Berliner with a dueling scar on his cheek, peers from his Panzer's cupola, the 5 cm KWK-38 gun trained on the horizon. Operation Typhoon, launched in October to encircle Moscow, had seemed unstoppable, until the Rasputitsa mud stalled them, and now this infernal winter. Reports from scouts spoke of Russian miracles. Tanks that appeared from nowhere, their guns firing high-velocity rounds that pierced armor like hot knives through butter. Weber scoffs to his gunner, Fritz, as they spot shadows in the tree-line. Soviet scrap heaps. We'll scatter them like wolves among sheep. But Petrov's T-34 doesn't scatter. As the first German probe, a reconnaissance patrol of 3 Panzer IIIs, emerges from the mist, Petrov barks into the intercom, "Load heat. Target the lead one, fire on my mark." The loader slams the shell home, the breech clanging shut. The T-34's turret swivels with a mechanical whine, faster than the lumbering German designs, its sloped front deflecting the initial burst from a Panzer's machine gun. Snow erupts around them, the ground shuddering as shells whistle past. You can almost feel the vibration through the hull, the acrid tang of cordite mixing with the frost. The mark comes and the 76mm roars, a thunderclap that echoes across the plains. The shell streaks true, slamming into the Panzer III's turret ring, igniting the ammo stowage in a fireball that blooms orange against the white. Weber's tank erupts next to it, the crew bailing out into the snow, their black uniforms stark against the drifts. Petrov's platoon surges forward, tracks grinding over frozen furrows, outmaneuvering the heavier Panzers in the tight terrain. German radios erupt in panic. "Ruski Panzers. They're everywhere, request air support." But the snow grounds the Messerschmitts, leaving the Wehrmacht blind. By dusk, as the counterattack gains momentum, Petrov's T-34 crests a rise overlooking the Lama River, the Moscow skyline a faint glow in the distance. The brigade has punched a hole in the German flank, their paper Panzers, littering the field like discarded toys. Yet the night promises more blood, waves of Soviet infantry following in the tank's wake, bayonets fixed, faces grim under fur hats. The Blitzkrieg, once a storm of steel, now falters in the snow, buried under the weight of the T-34's unyielding advance. As the T-34's tracks bite into the snow-swept rise above the Lama River, Captain Petrov feels the hull shift under him, the engines growl a steady pulse against the encroaching night. The glow of burning Panzers flickers in the rear view, their twisted hulks silhouetted against the horizon like fallen sentinels, ammunition cooking off in sporadic pops that light the faces of advancing Soviet ski troops. Petrov wipes frost from his brow, his gloved hand leaving a smear of grease, and keys the radio. All units push to the river line. Flank the fascists, don't let them regroup. The 1st Guards Tank Brigade, bolstered by fresh divisions from the Far East, surges like a steel tide, their 32 machines weaving through the birch stands where German anti-tank guns lie buried under drifts, their crews frozen in feudal positions. Down in the valley, the Lama's waters churn black and unforgiving, half frozen under a moon that casts long shadows over the German 3rd Panzer Army's exposed salient. Major General Heinz Guderian, ensconced in his command post near Klin, a ramshackle farmhouse turned war room, paces the creaking floorboards, his face etched with the strain of a campaign unraveling. Operation Typhoon, meant to crush the Soviet heart in a pincer of panzer might, now teeters on the brink. Intelligence reports flood in. T-34s, those riveted abominations mocked in Berlin's briefings as peasant contraptions unfit for real war, have shattered 2 forward battalions. Guderian slams a fist on the map table, where pins mark the stalled advance, only 30 kilometers from Moscow's spires. Where are Stukas? Damn this weather. He snarls to his adjutant, a young lieutenant shivering in his greatcoat. The Luftwaffe, grounded by blizzards, leaves the Panzers vulnerable, their thin tracks slipping on ice where the T-34's wider grousers grip like claws. Petrov's platoon descends the slope, the tank's suspension absorbing jolts that would snap a lesser machine. Inside, the loader, Private Sergei Kuznetsov, a Siberian farm boy with frostbitten ears, feeds another shell into the breach, his hands raw from the cold. Captain, scouts report a Panzer IV column bridging the river. The driver calls over the intercom, his voice muffled by the roar. Petrov nods, visualizing the scene. Those angular German tanks with their 75mm short-barreled guns designed for infantry support, not dueling equals. The T-34 was no beauty. Rushed prototypes tested in the Ukrainian fields had shed tracks on turns, and early models lacked radios, forcing flag signals in battle. But Koshkin's genius lay in simplicity. The sloped armor, angled at 60 degrees, turned glancing shots into ricochets, while the ZIS-4 gun hurled 700-meter-per-second projectiles that outranged and outpunched the Panzer IV's KWK-37. The ambush unfolds in the river's bend, where Soviet engineers have mined the approaches under cover of darkness. Petrov's T-34 halts behind a snow-mounted embankment, its low silhouette blending with the terrain, a far cry from the tall, top-heavy Panzers that silhouette against the sky. You hear it first, the distant clank of treads, then the growl of Maybach engines as 6 Panzer IVs rumble into view, their commanders' heads poking from hatches, scanning for threats. Leading them is Oberleutnant Karl Becker, a veteran of France with an iron cross pinned to his tunic, urging his driver onward. Faster. Moscow awaits, he shouts, oblivious to the shadows stirring in the white void. The first mine detonates with a muffled thump, flipping a half-track supply vehicle into the air, its fuel tanks erupting in a whoosh of flame that illuminates the column. Panic ripples through the Germans. Radios blare warnings as machine guns chatter blindly into the storm. Petrov's gunner, a sharp-eyed Tatar named Ruslin, acquires the lead Panzer IV through the haze. Range 400 meters, fire. The T-34 bucks as the 76mm barks, the shell arcing low and true, punching through the German's frontal plate where a flat shot would have bounced. The Panzer IV shudders, its turret smoking, crews spilling out to the merciless snow. Becker's tank veers left, returning fire. A 75mm round glances off the T-34's glacis, sparking harmlessly into the drift behind. The brigade erupts from concealment. T-34s bursting from the treeline like wolves from the pack, their mobility in the snow a revelation. One circles a bogged Panzer III, its wide tracks allowing it to ford a frozen stream where the German founders, engine whining in vain. They're too fast. Becker yells into his headset as another shell rips his track, immobilizing him. Soviet infantry clad in white camouflage, close in with PTRD anti-tank rifles, those long-barreled elephants firing 14. 5mm rounds that pierce tracks and optics. Bullets whip through the air, pinging off hulls, and the cries of the wounded carry on the wind, a chorus of defiance and despair. By midnight, the Lama crossing is a charnel house. 5 Panzers smoldering, their crews captured or cut down, while Petrov's T-34 presses on, linking with the 16th Army's flanks. Guderian receives the news at dawn, his face ashen. Losses mounting to 200 tanks in days, fuel lines severed by partisan raids. The T-34, once laughed off as a paper tiger's joke, now embodies the Soviet will, unrefined, unbreakable, turning the winter into a weapon sharper than steel. Zhukov's counteroffensive gathers steam, divisions pouring from Moscow's factories and railheads, the Red Army's roar drowning the fading echo of the Blitzkrieg. Dawn breaks over the Lama River like a reluctant witness, painting the wreckage in hues of gray and crimson as Captain Petrov's T-34 forges ahead, its exhaust trailing like a ghost in the biting wind. The 16th Army's infantry, faces blackened with frost and resolve, fan out alongside the tanks, their PP-41 submachine guns slung low, boots crunching through knee-deep snow toward the German-held town of Klin. Petrov's radio hums with fragmented reports. The 1st Guards Tank Brigade has linked with Rokossovsky's forces, their combined might swelling to over 100 T-34s, drawn from the Urals factories that never slept through the German onslaught. Forward to Klin, Zhukov's voice crackles from Moscow, distant but ironclad. Crush the spearhead, end this before the new year. The landscape unfolds in brutal layers. Abandoned German supply dumps, crates of frozen rations spilling like entrails, and the skeletal remains of Ju-52 transports grounded by the storm, their wings sheathed in ice. Petrov's driver navigates the drifts, the T-34's sloped hull shrugging off stray rounds from snipers hidden in the pines. Inside the turret, the air thickens with the metallic scent of spent casings. Sergei passing shells with mechanical rhythm while Ruslin wipes sweat from his eyes, the gunner's sight fogging from the heat of exertion. These men, forged in the fires of Barbarossa, Petrov from the factory floors, Sergei from taiga winters, embody the T-34's essence. Mass-produced resilience, over 1,000 rolling off lines by December, each a rebuttal to the finely tuned but outnumbered Panzers. Across the frozen fields, the Wehrmacht's 3rd Panzer Army reels, their lines fraying like old rope. At Klin's outskirts, Colonel General Gunther von Kluge huddles in a forward observation post, a requisitioned Orthodox church with icons staring down from cracked walls. Maps sprawl across an altar, marked with red arrows showing the Soviet thrust, waves of T-34s exploiting the winter's grip, where German fuel froze in cans and lubricants turned to paste. The Russians fight like devils, Kluge mutters to his staff, his monocle fogging as he traces the brigade's path. Hitler's paper Panzers, the Panzer IIIs with their 37mm guns, once derided by Soviets as pea shooters, now face obsolescence. Captured T-34s had been dissected in Berlin. Engineers marveled at the sloped armor's deflection, the diesel engine's resistance to fire, the wide tracks that turned snow into an ally. We underestimated their barbarity, one report admitted, but it was too late. Production lags meant only 3,000 Panzers fielded against the Red Army's tide. Petrov's platoon crests a ridge overlooking Klin, the town's spires piercing the haze like fingers accusing the sky. Below, a German strongpoint, entrenched 88mm flak guns, those 88s, that tore through T-34s at long range, guarded by a company of Panzer IVs forming a hasty lager. You sense the tension coiling, the low rumble of engines, the sharp crack of scouting rifles probing the flanks. Enemy armor, dead ahead, Ruslin reports, his voice steady despite the odds. Petrov orders a halt, the T-34s dispersing into hull-down positions behind drifts, their low profiles a stark contrast to the Panzer's upright silhouettes. Soviet artillery, 122mm howitzers dragged forward by tractors, opens up first, shells whistling overhead to crater the snow around the German guns, forcing crews to dive for cover. The duel ignites as a Panzer IV spots the lead T-34, its 75mm gun barking a round that skips off Petrov's glassy plate, the impact jarring like a hammer on anvil. Traverse right, engage. Petrov commands, the turret whirring as Ruslin aligns the sights. The 76mm thunders in reply, the high explosive round slamming into the Panzer's side, where armor thins to 30mm, breaching it clean, flames licking from the hatches as the commander, a Württemberg sergeant, thrashes in agony before the inferno claims him. Chaos erupts. T-34s maneuver in fluid arcs, using speed and terrain to flank, their Christie suspension smoothing the uneven ground where Panzers fishtail and stall. One Soviet tank, commanded by Lieutenant Olga Petrova, no relation but a rarity among crews, circles a Mark III, her gunner picking off its tracks before the kill shot, the German crew surrendering with hands raised against the white. German counterfire intensifies, an 88mm shell shearing a birch near Petrov's tank, splintering wood and snow in a deadly spray. They're calling in mortars, evade! The driver yells, slewing the T-34 left into a gully, tracks throwing up rooster tails of powder. Infantry pour from the flanks, Soviet penal battalions charging with fixed bayonets, their screams mingling with the din of MG-34 bursts. Kluge watches from his perch as the strongpoint crumbles, Panzers withdrawing in disarray, leaving burning wrecks and dazed prisoners who mutter of ghost tanks that appear from the storm. By midday Klin falls, the brigade's banners, red stars on white, hoisted over the town hall, while Petrov's T-34 idles amid the rubble, its crew sharing a ration of black bread, eyes scanning the horizon for the next push. Guderian retreating to Vyazma, cables Berlin with grim tallies. Over 300 tanks lost in the week, divisions at half strength, morale cracking under the endless white. The T-34s, dismissed as crude in summer's hubris, now dictate the battle's rhythm. Outgunning Panzers at 500 meters, outrunning them in the snow, their simplicity allowing repairs in the field with hammers and wire. Zhukov's grand counteroffensive swells, fresh Siberian troops under Konyev slamming the northern flank, the Red Army's momentum building like an avalanche. Moscow breathes easier, its factories churning out more steel siblings, the Blitzkrieg not just halted, but buried beneath the relentless Soviet surge. Afternoon shadows lengthen over Klin's liberated streets, where Captain Petrov's T-34 stands sentinel amid the acrid haze of smoldering timber and twisted metal, its crew dismounting to stretch numb limbs and check the tracks for ice buildup. The town, once a quiet rail junction, now pulses with the frenzy of victory. Soviet engineers rigging captured German radios for intercepts, medics hauling frostbitten wounded on sleds pulled by requisitioned horses, their whinnies cutting through the muffled cheers of the 16th Army's vanguard. Petrov lights a paparosa cigarette, the smoke curling like a question mark in the chill air, as he surveys the horizon. Vyazma lies 50 kilometers west, a linchpin in Guderian's crumbling salient, where the 4th and 20th Panzer armies converge in a desperate bid to hold the road to Moscow. We take it and the noose tightens, he mutters to Sergei, who nods while bandaging a shallow shrapnel cut on his arm, the blood stark against his pale skin. The 1st Guards Tank Brigade refuels under camouflage nets, jerry cans of diesel passed hand to hand from Ural-sourced trucks that have braved the partisan trails. These T-34s with their hexagonal turrets and overlapping road wheels, bear the scars of battle, gouges from ricochets on the sloped armor, a radio antenna snapped like a twig. Production miracles from the Tankograd factories in Chelyabinsk, evacuated in October's chaos, have flooded the front with reinforcements, over 2,000 T-34s by winter's peak, their simplicity a godsend in the cold where German optics fogged and engines seized. Petrov climbs back aboard, the hatch clanging shut as the order comes. Link with the 1st Shock Army under Kuznetsov, spearhead the drive to Vyazma, encircle the trapped Germans before they can slip the trap. The brigade rolls out at dusk, a column of steel ghosts gliding through the snowfields, their wide tracks distributing weight to float over drifts that swallow lesser vehicles. To the west, in Vyazma's encircled pocket, the Wehrmacht's nightmare unfolds in real time. General Walter von Brauchitsch, supreme commander of the army, receives frantic dispatches in his Berlin bunker, but it's Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, Army Group Center's harried leader, who feels the vice closing from a forward HQ in Smolensk, a city already echoing with the ghosts of summer's triumphs. The T-34s are devils incarnate, Bock confesses to his chief of staff over a field phone, static-laced reports painting a dire picture. Soviet tanks exploiting gaps in the frozen lines, their 76mm F-34 guns outranging the Panzer IV short 75mm at 1,000 meters, forcing German crews to close for point-blank shots. Hitler's earlier disdain, Soviet tanks are for show like their parades, rings hollow now, autopsies of wrecked T-34s reveal armor that shrugs off 50mm rounds, suspension that endures -40-degree shocks without fracturing. Petrov's platoon threads a narrow defile near the Rezev Road, the T-34's engine purring steadily as scouts on skis relay enemy positions. A Panzer Grenadier regiment dug in with towed Pak 38 anti-tank guns, backed by a dozen Mark IIIs forming a mobile reserve. The ambush springs as night deepens, Soviet Katyusha rockets, those Stalin organs, screaming overhead in a fiery barrage that turns the snow to steam, blinding the Germans with flash and thunder. All ahead, engage the armor. Petrov shouts, the T-34 surging from the treeline, its spotlight cutting the dark like a saber. You feel the jolt as shells impact nearby, the hull ringing like a bell, but the slope deflects them. A 50mm round from a Panzer III glances off at 30 degrees, embedding harmlessly in a drift. The Panzers respond with fury, their commanders, veterans like Lieutenant Otto Müller, whose France campaign medals now seem from another war, traversing turrets in frantic sweeps. Müller's Mark III fires first, the tracer streaking toward Petrov's flank, but the T-34 pivots with predatory grace, its superior power-to-weight ratio allowing a tight turn that exposes the Germans' weaker side. Ruslin's shot connects, the armor-piercing round, tungsten cord for bite, puncturing the riveted plate, igniting the fuel tanks in a gout of flame that silhouettes the chaos. Müller's crew bails, stumbling into the snow where Soviet machine gunners cut them down, their screams lost in the roar. Flanking T-34s pour fire into the infantry positions, he shells bursting to shred sandbags and foxholes, while the brigade's speed, up to 55 km per hour on roads, lets them encircle the pack guns before reloads. In the melee, a T-34 takes a direct hit from an 88mm, hidden in a ruined barn. The turret spins off in a spray of sparks, but Petrov's tank presses on, linking with Kuznetsov's shock troops who storm the lines with flamethrowers, the whoosh of napalm mingling with the chatter of Degtyaryov light machine guns. By false dawn, the defile is secured, German prisoners, over 5,000 in the initial sweep, herded eastward under guard, their faces gaunt with the realization of defeat. Bock orders a breakout, but it's futile. T-34s block the escapes, their guns barking in the half-light, turning the pocket into a cauldron. Guderian, withdrawing his 2nd Panzer Group, abandons heavy equipment to save the men, fuel drums exploding as rearguards cover the retreat. Petrov halts on a rise overlooking Vyazma's outskirts, the town a flicker of fires in the distance, the encirclement complete, over 600,000 Germans trapped, their Blitzkrieg dream dissolving in the snow. Zhukov's strategy unfolds like a masterstroke. The T-34s as the hammer, infantry and artillery the anvil, pushing the front 100 kilometers in days. Casualties mount, Soviet losses heavy but replaceable unlike the Wehrmacht's irreplaceable cadre, but the momentum is Soviet now, Moscow's defense forged in the crucible of winter's wrath. As the brigade digs in for the night, Petrov gazes east, where more T-34s rumble from the railheads, the paper Panzers forever interred, their laughter silenced by the T-34's unyielding roar. The first gray light of January 1942 filters through the Vyazma pocket's haze, where Captain Petrov's T-34 idles on the frost-cracked road, its idling engine a low growl that vibrates through the crew's bones as they huddle over a map spread on the engine deck. Smoke from distant pyres, German trucks and guns consigned to the flames, stings the eyes, mingling with the sharp scent of pine sap from splintered forests. The encirclement has yielded a torrent of prisoners, ragged columns of Wehrmacht men, their Feldgrau uniforms crusted with ice, shuffling eastward under the watch of NKVD guards with PPSH drums at the ready. Petrov traces the next objective with a gloved finger, Rzhev, the gateway to the Rzhev-Vyazma salient, where Bach's army group center clings like a wounded animal. Zhukov wants it by week's end, he says to Ruslin, who nods while cleaning the gun breech with a rag stiff from cold. The 1st Guards Tank Brigade, now augmented to 50 T-34s from Chkalov factories, prepares to thrust north, joining the 20th Army under Vlasov in a pincer that will shatter the German bulge. Across the front, the Soviet counteroffensive swells into a maelstrom, divisions from the Kalinin front under Konyev slamming into the flanks like hammers on an anvil. These T-34s, their sloped hulls scarred but unbowed, embody the Red Army's rebirth. Over 3,000 produced in the frantic months since Barbarossa, their V2 diesels immune to the cold that strangled Maybach engines, allowing dawn starts while Panzers lay inert. Petrov's tank leads the column eastward along the snow-cloaked highway, tracks churning a path through drifts that bury abandoned Pak-40 guns. Newer German 75mm anti-tanks rush to the front, but too few too late. Inside, the air warms from the heater's feeble output, Sergei humming a folk tune from his village to ward off the chill, his hands black with oil from field repairs. A welded patch over a glancing hit, tracks relinged with Soviet ingenuity. In Berlin's Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler rages at the midday briefing, his voice echoing off marble walls as aides avert their eyes from the map's ominous arrows. The Bolshevik tanks, those T-34 monstrosities, have turned our winter into hell, he thunders to General Halder, chief of the General Staff, who stands rigid, concealing his own doubts. Reports from the front detail the rout. T-34s outmaneuvering Sturmgeschütz assault guns in the open steppes, their 76mm guns firing AP rounds that penetrate 80mm at 500 meters, where Panzer IV up gun variants lag behind in production. German engineers, poring over captured prototypes in Kummersdorf, concede the design's brilliance. Sloped armor equivalent to 90mm flat plate, mobility rivaling the Panzer II's but with firepower of a heavy. Yet hubris had blinded them. Summer's easy victories dismissed Soviet industry as shattered, ignoring the Ural Heartland's output, now fueling Zhukov's fury. Petrov's brigade crests the hills near Medin, the wind whipping snow devils across the plain where the 4th Shock Army masses for the assault. Below, German rearguards, a mixed force of Panzer Grenadiers and half-tracks, hold a rail embankment, their MG-42s chattering like buzzsaws to stem the tide. Dismount and advance. Petrov orders as the T-34s fan out, hull down behind rises, their wide tracks allowing them to traverse slopes that send lighter vehicles sliding. You hear the symphony of war, the whine of incoming Nebelwerfer rockets from Soviet lines, blooming into fireballs that rout the German infantry, followed by the throaty bark of T-34 guns. Ruslin's first shot silences a bunker, the He round exploding in a shower of concrete and screams, while a flanking T-34 duels a Stu-G3, its casemate design no match for the Soviets' turret traverse, a side shot breaching the superstructure in a flash of orange. The Panzers counter from a wooded copse, 3 Mark IV OSF. F-1s emerging with long-barreled 75mm KWK-40s, their first real answer to the T-34, but outnumbered 3-1. Leading is Hauptmann Erich von Manstein's aide, Lieutenant Dieter Hahn, whose tank lurches forward, firing on the move. Hahn's round clips a T-34's turret, sparking but not penetrating, the slope sending it careening into the snow. Reload AP, traverse to the leader. Petrov snaps, the T-34's speed closing the range to 300 meters, where its gun's accuracy shines. The exchange is brutal, shells trading in the air, one German round shattering Petrov's optics in a spray of glass, forcing Ruslin to fire by estimate. Their reply punches through Hahn's front, the commander slumping as flames erupt, his crew's desperate escape cut short by pursuing infantry with Molotov cocktails, bottles of naphtha igniting in sticky fire. The breakthrough comes swift, T-34s pouring through the gap, overrunning supply depots where German mechanics curse frozen tools, capturing dozens of half-assembled Panzer upgrades. Soviet ski troops glide alongside, their white capes blending with the storm, PTRS rifles picking off crewmen atop wrecks. By evening, Medin falls, the brigade linking with Konev's forces to squeeze the salient German divisions, the 19th Panzer under Guderian, retreating in haste, abandoning 100 tanks to the cold. Casualties toll high. Petrov loses 2 T-34s to mines, their crews pulled from the inferno by comrades, bandaged and sent rearward. Yet replacements arrive by rail, fresh models with improved vents against engine fires, keeping the pressure unrelenting. As January deepens, the counteroffensive peaks. Moscow suburbs secure, the front pushed 250 kilometers west. The Wehrmacht's Blitzkrieg not merely halted but reversed, its paper panzers rusting in snow graves. Bach withdraws to prepared lines at Rzhev, but the damage is irreparable. Over 700,000 casualties, irreplaceable losses that doom the Eastern Front's summer hopes. Petrov's T-34, battered but rolling, halts on a ridge under aurora lights, the crew sharing vodka from a canteen, toasting the motherland. The Soviets' laughter at Hitler's machines has turned to thunder, the T-34 burying the invasion in an unmarked tomb of ice and steel, ensuring the war's pivot towards Soviet steel.